Welcome to the Lessons from Lab and Life podcast. I'm your host, Lydia Morrison, and I hope that this interview offers you some new perspective. Today I'm speaking with Kate Creasey Krainer, founder of the Grow More Foundation, whose mission is to help end world hunger by bringing synthetic biology tools to developing countries and enabling communities to grow more fruitful crops. Hi, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lydia. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're here today to tell us about the Grow More Foundation. Could you tell us what the foundation's all about?
Well, it's about applying plant science. I'm a basic plant scientist by training, and for a longest time, we always want to actually see the application of our work, and it's sort of very rare. This was predominantly due to the fact that plant biotechnology, to take it from lab to field to table, is really expensive. The regulatory costs associated and the time from development to product is just, it's in my opinion, it's worse than drug discovery and drug development. But then again, hunger and food insecurity is pretty much like the biggest disease that will affect us. So why not see biotech and food as the potential cure for that? And so Gromor Foundation was founded about 5 years ago, where a group of plant scientists came together and were just like, okay, then let's see if we can use some of the basic science that we dream about applying in the lab to an actual problem, predominantly in developing countries, and see the outcome. And this really wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the advent of CRISPR technologies, and the evolution of the regulatory process mean that really the time is now for applying plant science in CRISPR to solve agricultural issues around the world.
Interesting. So how are you go about applying this science? How are you getting the science into sort of the hands of the growers?
Basically, it's all about the connections of scientists in the developed world and in the developing, and then the scientists in the developing taking on their work to share it with not only the top down, the policymakers and those in charge of the regulatory decisions, but also the bottom up, the consumer, and then the growers themselves, the smallholder farmers. And our approach is basically, will we be able to provide capacity building resources that can have an impact all the way through, not just in the lab for the fun of the science, but really solve problems that are affecting the people in that community, in that country. And so obviously a very big problem, very big issue that we've decades of the groups have been involved in this kind of work. It's going to take more than one organization, but we're just focusing predominantly on plant science and how that can be applied and have an impact.
So as you're thinking about how that can be applied and have an impact, is that what led you to develop the Enable platform?
Exactly. So enabling others, it's the arm, the actual functionality of Gromor Foundation. So we envision many enable kits, but for the first one, like Enable 1.0, is enable gene editing. And this has been a wonderful collaboration with Dr. Florian Hahn at the University of Oxford and NEB. If it wasn't for New England Biolabs providing our reagents, these kits are basically made up of a cloning system where the user will just basically learn how to apply CRISPR to their plants. So we're talking about a simple two-step mechanism for cloning in the components that are necessary to lead to CRISPR, the knock out deletion system. And this is what scientists and my colleagues in Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia are really excited about this technology. But the majority of the time, scientists in developing countries, they always feel like they have to leave their country to learn the technique, especially the newest up and coming biotech. And so it's an issue that they can't get hold of it, or the education or the basically the understanding of applying the new technologies. But the majority of time as well, the technologies are predominantly developed from model species to economically important crops. And so we developed the cloning system for basically predominantly for orphan staple crops. So these are the crops that don't receive as much funding or attention traditionally, and a bit more complicated to work with because there's a lot of protocols that need to be worked through. But our hope is basically with enable gene editing being our first cloning kit that we provide pro bono to developing countries, will enable the scientists to take on this new technique and apply it to whatever problem they see fit. They're solving their agricultural issues themselves. We're providing a resource, but they're the ones doing the work with their own hands in their own lab for their own outcome in their own country. So it's all about enabling. I personally don't believe that we should be, people in the developed world should be solving the problems for those in others, and that the scientists in developing countries are more than capable of doing this work. And it's just a case of giving them, the resources in a very sort of simplified and starter process they wouldn't normally get hold of. The first thing about setting up a CRISPR experiment, I'm always invited to give, lectures, seminars, workshops, and I always find it's very difficult. Obviously, the Zoom issue with COVID, everyone's aware of. You really need that hands-on. So as many times I've given talks about how to go about, searching for a gene candidate or identifying a guide RNA, or just even how to do the, stitching together of the vectors through the Golden Gate system, the type 2 restriction enzymes. Unless you're really doing it yourself with, with your own hands, the molecular work, it sort of doesn't have the same kind of resonance of what I think could really make a huge impact, especially if the regulatory decisions go the way that they're predicted to, based on what I've heard from my colleagues in Kenya and Nigeria. So it's really just about getting that resource to the people and then them deciding how they apply it and what they target.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing a great job empowering those local individuals to really take the reins of their own crop development. How do you provide the training so that those people can realize the functionality of the kits?
Right. So the idea is that the kit is that simplified that any scientist with PhD students up, they basically just get in their hand and follow a protocol. Understanding it comes from the complexity of, there's control guides that can be cloned, but to understand basically the simple molecular cloning pathway. And then we hope that these kits not only will be used for scientists to apply to their problem, but also in their teaching programs, so they can train the next generation to just be exposed to this technology. We know that videos are going to have to supplement whenever we can't physically, have people there to demonstrate the use of the kit. But the kit is really designed to be that straightforward that anyone with a basic rudimentary molecular background and can hold a pipette can follow the microliters and the timing. There are a few other pieces of equipment that are necessary. For example, for restriction ligation, they need the PCR machine, the thermocycler. But it's pretty much, if they're able to do any kind of cloning, which molecularly, it's what we tend to use in biotechnology, they'll be able to perform CRISPR.
That's really great. And so, what's the adoption been like?
Well, because of obviously the setbacks of 2020, we are still yet to send out our beta testing kits. And this is really frustrating because we want to see how, all the different issues that might face from trying to get these reagents in one piece and usable when they get there, but also the feedback of what we might need to, change and literally edit in this editing system. But the desire for these kits is very strong. I again, the colleagues that I've come to know in the last couple of years of listening basically to the scientists in these countries that are wanting, they've heard about it, but they think it's something that's a lot more difficult and challenging than what it really is. And I try and explain to them, actually, the difficult part, when it's not the genomics, which is basically upstream, is a completely separate part to CRISPR. It's actually the transformation and regeneration. That's the trickiest part for getting
Mm.
any technology into the plant. So the middle part, the actual molecular part of the CRISPR, I mean, it's very straightforward. It can be made as complex as you need it. So you're swapping out restriction markers, swapping out promoters, the bits that make it expressed in the plant.
Hmm.
But in our simplified kit, it's just giving them an introduction to how it works, and then they can actually, after up to 2 weeks of doing the cloning, get it into their plant and see the outcome. So it's a really amazing technology, and it's scientists in developing countries should have access. They should be enabled to have it and shouldn't rely upon trying to forge new collaborations elsewhere in order to utilize this skill, this technique. But that's the same for any biotechnology that's developed. The next new wave of technology, that'll be enable 2.0, enable 3.0. The idea is to grow as the science develops, but make it specifically applicable to orphan staple crops, whether it's that codon optimization or looking for new promoters, or just doing feasibility and sort of testing to see if it actually can go to plan as easily as we envision or aim it to be, to simplify it down as much as possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a really surprisingly quick workflow, I think, too, to be able to actually get those genetic edits into the crops themselves.
Right. I mean, it's taking advantage of the cellular repair mechanisms for double-stranded DNA breaks. I mean, that work's been out for decades, trying to understand how to actually, lead to different repair mechanism to then lead to more edits. It's still sort of, anything can happen. But in terms of the biotech, to go through each stage, it is less expensive and quicker than other techniques. I mean, for gene editing, which obviously the advent of talons and zinc fingers years ago, CRISPR sort of just exploded, and it just should be applied by everyone. Should be able to apply it to their plant if they want to, and it's always been sort of associated with developing countries. The science has always been a little bit behind, not benefiting. Their orphan staples never benefited from the green revolution as much, and from the genomics era, the orphan crops were lagging behind with their genomes. But as that gets, more affordable, more accessible, it really is the right time to start actually applying some biotech, which before now, the classical GMO transgenics, because of that 100 million plus and decade of to get it to a product, it's not surprising that very few, if any, scientists were thinking of strategies to develop a product from it. It would have been impossible practically. I mean, even you can tell with vitamin A, the golden rice scenario, Rich Roberts' great effort to lead the Nobel laureates to get Greenpeace to agree that this supplemented biofortified crop can actually do some good and should be allowed and accessible, but because it's made with the transgenic technology to overexpress the beta carotene, it's been a massive undertaking. So lives could have been saved and lives could have been changed and impacted from the 90s when this was first developed. And it's only sort of now, in the last couple of years, that certain countries have even deregulated it. So when it's an economically important crop and it's a trait that impacts the farmer, that's where the classical transgenics was focusing on because of the costs, basically. If it was an academic process, it needed industry collaboration to take it all the way. And now with CRISPR and the evolution of the regulatory landscape, certain countries are still deciding, and the ones that have made a decision, for example, in America, if it's a no foreign DNA, not a transgenic, it's considered, molecular breeding, and therefore doesn't go through that regulatory, that costly, timely regulatory pathway. So I think there's a chance some real good could come out of applying that technology.
So important because you're communicating the science behind it really well. And that increased understanding of what's actually being done when you're editing a plant genome for a crop can only help increase acceptance of the technology.
It's a chance for scientists with different kinds of budgets to actually apply to their own crops without needing kind of the usual industry collaboration, which means it doesn't always have to be a trait that will impact the farmers, but it could be a trait that will be of benefit to the consumer in a crop that wouldn't normally ever receive the kind of attention that an economically important crop would. So I think it's really leveling the field, basically. It's giving any scientist a chance to do some great work, and the outcome can have an impact where there isn't this, huge association with costs. But then again, there's always, licensing issues with as everything is, as everything goes with patents. But there are some great groups that basically make sure that any benefit for smallholder farmers in developing countries, there's a regulatory pathway that will enable them to take it to product development. But we're at the very early stages, though. I mean, it would be wonderful to see the actual impact for products within our lifetimes, basically. And I think CRISPR is allowing that to happen sooner. Fingers crossed. And as
Yeah.
Gromor is just developing, I mean, we're listening, basically. None of us are, as plant scientists, we obviously enjoy the work. We're excited by it. We want to think about those problems and address whatever issues it is in the process of the crop. And these orphan staples, there's lots of issues that need to be addressed for getting them, to get systems from which variety to use, or which particular tweaking of the technique for getting regeneration. And it's really, that's what I really enjoy doing. But if it's not getting the chance to be out there and utilized and understood, that's an issue. And then you hit exactly on the problem of society's acceptance, which again, it's all about the scientists in their own country having this opportunity to share and communicate what they're doing and how they're doing it, and they have to do that, both approaches. Unfortunately, some scientists I've been speaking with, it's exactly what they're doing. So, Tripathi has done some great CRISPR work in plantain, and then Eric Dankwa in Ghana, who's basically founded organizations to not only train the next generation of scientists, but really make sure that Ghana's in an impactful place for the crops that they like to grow and consume themselves, to get those techniques to apply to them. So there are some great scientists that are already undertaking this work in developing countries, and it's just a case of, well, how can Growmore come in and provide a resource or facilitate in any capacity? Because it's just enabling. They can do it themselves. We're not providing the solution. We're not helping anyone. It's just colleagues communicating.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it definitely sounds like Growmore is working really hard to enable and empower those individuals in developing worlds to do just that. Do you have any stories of things that have happened during quarantine that have been good for you?
Other than being, terrified of, loved ones, friends, family catching COVID, or ourselves, although as soon as, the first initial kind of it came out, as scientists, my husband and I just sort of buckled down. We didn't go anywhere and we didn't do anything. And, well, we worked at home.
Mm-hmm.
Zoom became, very much a daily situation. And we would normally travel at least once a month, if not more than that. My husband would travel pretty much every week, nationally and internationally, pretty much 3 continents in, space of 2 or 3 months usually. So it was a very, for everything just to stop was very different. Even the students at university, it was kind of like, okay, getting used to teaching online, but no one going in the lab, nothing getting done. So getting over the initial shock, changing some working habits, but I was actually okay. Like, I feel like it was a break needed for me. It's like I couldn't normally I would if I wouldn't give myself that break. So for the whole of 2020 to be this one long break, month to month, thinking what was going to change, even though nothing did, and we had both said we're not going to obviously go anywhere until we get the vaccine, and just taking a break from like everything, and it was really lovely. I hadn't felt that good for some time. So it is great because I basically call 2020 my year of peace, because of how much I couldn't do because of extenuating circumstances, and it really gave me a chance to sort of reflect on, well, where is Growmore going? How can we develop? How can we grow? When I provided the foundation's endowment, it was sort of in the mindset of, right, this is to basically start preliminary projects to test what could work, and how things could develop, to then the usual seek the extra, the collaborators and the more funding for having impact. So it gave me a moment just to kind of, everything had stopped, so I could stop, and then, right, what have we achieved? Where's it actually going? What would make a difference? Because that's pretty much what I ask myself every day, which is unusual because for most of my training, my academic career, PhD, postdoc, prof, the problem was so focused, and so I could always feel like I made some kind of incremental progress because I always saw how it was going because of that focused problem. But starting Growmore, it's like there's the focus just exploded. It's not a particular crop, it's all different crops. It's not just a particular country, it's all different countries. It's not just a particular technique or a particular technology, it's any of the new and up and coming. So it's sort of even for me it's a bit much. So I was able to make such an amazing network of collaborators, advisors in all aspects of plant fields, from agronomy, plant breeding, to the biotechnology and CRISPR. So it's been wonderful just how many of my colleagues have been very happy to come together and discuss where they think it's going and what should be done, and how it could be developed, versus just listening basically to my other colleagues about, well, what would they want, what is it they're needing. And so at the end of the day, it's what it's all about. I think in science we all dream of our what we develop to be actually used and applied and have some kind of meaningful impact. It's not just a line on a grant about trying to solve, food insecurity or SDGs, and it's not just something we say for the fun of it. Of this technology could have an impact in agriculture. It really, really could. We believe that, we wholeheartedly do, and I just hope Grow More is one of the parts of the puzzle that can just not only enable others to do the work, but make sense in the fact that the sharing and the communication of everyone is key. So we'll see. Hopefully I'll have some updates to share in the future with you. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about them. And I hope the same thing for Grow More. And I'm glad that you were able to find a silver lining in a moment of pause in your year of peace, to step back. Because scientists certainly, are up close to the problem. I think it's really important to have been able to have that chance, right? To step back and look at the bigger picture and the bigger impact. And I think Grow More is going to have an amazing impact on the world. So thank you so much for founding it and working on this problem.
Just fingers are crossed, and we'll see. But thank you very much for saying that, and it's just been a pleasure speaking with you today. And thank you to everyone at NEB, because not only obviously having the connection of Rich Roberts on our board, but Carol Keating, even just supporting Enable, the concept in the very first meeting. I shared with her the story about how I actually got an NEB starter kit in my first couple of weeks of my PhD years and years and years ago at the University of Edinburgh. And I felt enabled to carry out experiments that I would normally have done because, the cost of the reagent, or, the idea was probably crazy, but it was my kit. It was my reagents. It was, my little floaty. I could do whatever I wanted with it. And that was just something that was sort of also there with why Enable became Enable. I was listening to my colleagues of they wanted to learn these techniques, and then I remembered, okay, then I'm going to basically try and do the same thing for them by providing the reagents that I got once upon a time. So Enable really is in part because of NEB.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that.
Oh, and you said Penny DeVoe as well. She's actually been, orchestrating all of the communications and everything. So big thank you to her, and again to everyone at NEB.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice of you to say. And I'm sure that the team would be delighted to know that they helped inspire the idea of bringing kits of knowledge to people. So that's really special. And thank you so much for joining me today, Kate. It's been really a pleasurable conversation.
Thank you.
Join us for the next episode when I interview Professor Jim Hasselhoff of the University of Cambridge about his work using synthetic biology to engineer plant growth and his efforts to further low-cost instrumentation and diagnostics.